On July 28, 1977, Travis Victor Alexander was born in Riverside, California, the son of Gary and Pamela Alexander. Travis's early years were marred by tragedy. At age 11, an unstable and ultimately toxic home life forced him to live with his paternal grandparents after his father's tragic death in mid-1997. He was followed by his 7 brothers and sisters. Despite his rough upbringing, Travis performed rather well in school, attended college, and eventually secured a job with a company known as Prepaid Legal Services, PPL, first as a salesman and later as the company's motivational speaker, a position that paid considerably better. As part of his job at PPL, Travis often attended conferences that took place in Las Vegas, applying his trade as a motivational speaker in front of audiences of hundreds. During one such conference in September 2006, there was one particular woman in the audience who was enraptured by Travis's charisma and talent for public speaking. She approached him afterward, introducing herself and striking up a conversation that would spark a long-term friendship. This woman's name was Jodi Arias. Jodi and Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to a mother of European ancestry and a father of Mexican ancestry. After she met Travis at the PPL conference, the pair grew increasingly close, leading Jodi to convert to Mormonism just 2 months later, actually being baptized by Travis himself at a ceremony that took place in Southern California. Despite the distance between them, the couple began dating a few months later, and Jodi even took steps to move to Mesa and then Yreka, California, living in her grandparents' place to be closer to Travis. Travis and Jodi had a tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship for almost a year and a half, often forced to maintain a long-distance relationship due to the fact that one lived in Arizona while the other remained in California for work. Such distance would put a strain on any relationship, but there appeared to be additional factors that made Jodi and Travis's relationship less than healthy. From the very first time Travis introduced Jodi to his close friends, they seemed to take an instant dislike to her. Jodi didn't seem keen to impress or ingratiate herself with them, appearing generally disinterested in anyone but Travis. His friends detected a kind of jealousy in her, noting that she acted overly possessive of Travis while failing to show him much affection. From the start, they found Jodi's behavior worrying, even frightening. Shortly after Jodi moved into her grandparents' home in Yreka, she and Travis arranged to accompany one another on a week-long work-related trip to Cancun, Mexico. Scheduled for June 15, the couple intended to make something of a vacation out of it. However, not long after, Travis reportedly went to company headquarters to request that his travel companion be changed to another member of the sales team. Speculation regarding this decision is abundant, but the best guess is that it involved a breakdown in his and Jodi's relationship. On May 28, Jodi called Travis in a state of distress, telling him there had been a burglary at her grandparents' place where she was staying. Feeling unsafe, she begged to come and stay with him for a while. The burglars had stolen a number of valuable items during the break-in, but the most significant was a .25 caliber Colt pistol that belonged to her grandfather. The police had no luck finding the perpetrators and eventually gave up searching altogether, as they couldn't seem to find any evidence to identify those involved. In response to Jodi's plea to stay with him, Travis straight up refused. This might be the best evidence we have that the two had broken up by that point. If Travis loved her or had any feelings for her at all, surely he would have offered her a place to stay, but he didn't. Alternatively, it's possible that Travis did love her but was stopped from inviting her over by something else. It's plausible that there were other women in Travis's life, but it is also possible he didn't invite Jodi over because he was afraid of her. On June 2, Jodi called Travis yet again, repeatedly attempting to reach him between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. However, her cell phone records show that the longest call was a mere 17 seconds, indicating he likely didn't pick up the phone. Just after 3 in the morning, Travis called Jodi back, and the pair engaged in a lengthy conversation that we have no idea what was said during that call. but we do know that at around 5:30 that same morning, Jody drove over to a car rental place in Redding, California, entering the business shortly after it opened at 8 a.m. She told the clerk that she wished to use the car for a long drive to Utah for a work-related trip and then planned to visit a few friends on her way to Utah, where she would meet up with a fellow PPL employee named Ryan Burns. However, Jody didn't show up to meet Ryan until late in the evening on June 3rd, leaving a sizable amount of time to be accounted for that day. When she did finally arrive in the West Jordan suburb of Salt Lake City to meet Ryan Burns, he noticed some unusual things about Kirka. Firstly, he saw that her normally dyed blonde hair was now brown but not its natural shade of brown, and she seemed to have cuts or scratches all over her hands. Jody also refused to let him near the rental car, insisting they take his car to the PPL business conference. Naturally, Ryan thought this behavior was unusual, but the pair had more important concerns as the conference kept them occupied for the majority of the day. Ryan had an additional reason to keep quiet about Jody's unusual behavior. He and Jody had begun something of a love affair during their time in Utah, spending several hours hugging and kissing on a large beanbag chair at the place they were staying. Jody reassured him about the cuts on her hands by saying she had gotten them while working part-time at a Mexican restaurant in the Wairika area, an excuse that seemed sufficient to assuage his suspicions. Once their business concluded, Jody departed from Salt Lake City on June 6, driving back westward toward California. Her cell phone records showed that she tried to call Travis several times, leaving a handful of voicemails, yet she also apparently found a way to access the voicemail system. Why exactly she chose to do so remains a matter of conjecture, but it certainly constitutes some rather unusual behavior. When she returned the rental car to the outlet in Redding, the clerk began to inspect the interior as a matter of routine. It was then he too noticed something unusual. The vehicle was missing its floor mats, and on the driver and passenger sides, there were some kind of stains on the upholstery, as if some thick liquid had been spilled and left to dry. However, since the upholstery was black and the color of said liquid was not visible, no suspicions were raised among the staff at the car rental outlet, and the interior was clean before it could be inspected by anyone important. Meanwhile, a few days prior, Travis's employers had tried to contact him for a conference call, only to have their calls go unanswered. This same pattern repeated for several days, with friends and colleagues calling, only for Travis not to pick up his phone. By June 9th, a handful of Travis's friends began to worry about his well-being and agreed to go over to his home to check on him. They spoke to a few other tenants who lived in the same building as Travis and found they hadn't seen him in a few days. However, since he traveled for work frequently, they didn't seem to think there was anything to worry about. One of Travis's neighbors was in possession of the spare key to his apartment, which Travis had entrusted to them in case he ever lost his keys. The concerned group of friends proceeded to unlock the door to Travis's apartment, calling out his name as they entered. Then, one of them froze with a sharp gasp, pointing to a pool of congealed blood that sat in the hallway of Travis's bedroom. In a panic, they began to search the apartment for him, eventually encountering the sight of his days-old corpse lying in the bathtub, covered in blood. His friends cried and screamed as they called 911 but did not attempt to revive him, as it was obvious from the state of his dead body that he had been deceased for some time. During the 911 call that followed the discovery, a police dispatcher asked if Travis had potentially contemplated ending his own life or if his friends knew of anyone who might have been threatening his life. His friends immediately mentioned Jody Arias, his ex-girlfriend, as a possible suspect in his murder. They indicated that in the days before his death, Travis had mentioned that Jody had been stalking him, accusing him of seeing someone else, and seemed to be in some form of jealous rage. This psychopathic jealousy led her to attempt to access his Facebook account and even go so far as to slash his car's tires. When investigating officers arrived at Travis's home, they commenced an intense search. for any evidence or clues regarding the identity of the killer. One of the most curious things they discovered was a recently purchased digital camera found in the washing machine. Despite significant water damage, police were able to recover the camera's memory card, which had a number of photographs that someone had apparently attempted to delete. These photographs showed Travis and Jodi in numerous suggestive poses taken on the afternoon of June 4. The final photograph from the series was taken at 5:39 p.m. that same day and showed Travis alive and well while taking a shower, smiling playfully and completely naked, a candid depiction of the man's final moments. Another photograph taken just minutes later depicted Travis bleeding profusely while lying on the bathroom floor. DNA samples were collected from bloody handprints found in the bathroom, which provided police with solid evidence to arrest a suspect, as they contained not only Travis's DNA but also Jodi Arias's. After being indicted for first-degree murder by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Jodi was arrested at her home in California and then extradited to Arizona on September 5, 2008. Less than a week later, she pled not guilty, providing several different accounts of her alleged involvement in Travis's death. Initially, she told investigating officers that she was nowhere near Arizona on the day her ex-boyfriend was murdered, but after pressure from the cops, she admitted she had been present at the time of his death but claimed it involved a home invasion where two individuals broke into Travis's residence, killing him and attacking her in turn. 2 years of investigation later, Jodi changed her story entirely, telling the police that she had indeed killed Travis but only in self-defense. She spun a tale of brutal domestic violence, claiming she was a victim of a cruel and violent man and that she regularly feared for her life around him. At her trial in February 2013, Jodi recounted to the jury that she had been physically and emotionally abused by her parents and that her life with Travis had echoed that same cycle of abuse and guardianship, one she wanted to escape from but couldn't quite bring herself to. She described the abusive lifestyle Travis subjected her to, which she said included a considerable amount of BDSM and other painful acts that violated Mormon rules. Jodi also recorded a phone conversation with Travis that she used as evidence to prove he had once wanted to use zip ties to tie her to a tree while she dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. She claimed to have responded enthusiastically on the phone but testified in court that it was all an act, stating the idea terrified her and was typical of the kinds of things Travis wanted to do. Jodi also alleged that Travis admitted to finding underage children attractive, painting him as a complete monster. However, the prosecution argued that Jodi was a vengeful and vindictive person who had recorded the phone conversation in an attempt to blackmail Travis and embarrass him before his Mormon peers. The prosecution also questioned a forensic expert before the jury, prompting them to confirm that a thorough examination of Travis's computer found no evidence of child pornography or any references to anything inappropriate with children. Rebuttal witnesses from the prosecution included several of Travis's other girlfriends, who stated he never exhibited problems with anger or violence. Clinical psychologist Janine Demarte testified for the prosecution, stating she found no evidence that Travis had ever abused Jodi, and also noted that Jodi suffered from borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. The final nail in Jodi's legal coffin was the prosecution telling the jury that a single .25 caliber bullet casing was found near Travis's body, the same caliber as the gun stolen from her grandparents' place just a week before the murder. It turned out Jodi had faked the entire burglary just to obtain the murder weapon, which not only demonstrated she was a dangerous psychopath willing to harm those close to her to achieve her goals, but also indicated that she had been planning to kill Travis for quite some time. After a trial that reportedly cost U.S. taxpayers over $3 million, the jury found Jodi guilty of first-degree murder. She narrowly avoided the death penalty when a judge essentially took pity on her mental illness, sentencing her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to pay Travis's siblings over $30,000 in damages. As of 2016, Jodi is housed at Arizona State Prison Complex Perryville, and her case and trial have garnered considerable social media interest, with even Donald Trump commenting on what he called her obvious guilt. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this whole sordid drama is that Travis may have genuinely believed he had found the love of his life. Searching for the fairy tale romance that all people desire, he found the polar opposite, a living nightmare that ended with him losing his life to someone who could fairly be described as a conniving, violent, psychopathic predator. Relationships break down all the time for various reasons. People hurt, people cry, but most ultimately move on and find someone else. Jodi took that chance away from Travis in a horrifically callous and bloody manner. Instead of letting Travis go, she dragged him down like a sinking ship, one from which neither of them will ever emerge intact. My mom dated a guy called Jim between the years of 2001 and 2003. He was a seemingly nice guy, clean-cut, had a gut, but was easily over 6 foot and fairly built. He had no children and owned a property in a city in the Midwest. I remember being disappointed when she broke up with him, as he was lots of fun to be around. However, she claimed that she didn't want to be with him anymore because he was a smoker. Fast forward about a year later, it was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and my 13-year-old self was playing video games in my room while my mom was at work. I heard our garage door open, and given that we lived in a cozy townhouse, the sound of the door opening was relatively pronounced. I thought it was weird, as my mom never came home from work until about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and she would have called to let me know if she was getting off work early. So I peered out of my window, which directly overlooks the driveway, only to see a silver Audi parked outside Jim's car. After a few minutes of wondering why he was at our house, I realized that my mom hadn't been communicating with him at all since they broke up. I don't think he got out of his car, as he eventually closed the door and pulled out of the driveway. This led me to believe that he still had our door code programmed into his car. In the past, he would stay over a lot, so the fact that he had our code wasn't alarming. What was concerning was that he still had it in his car. If he had come in, it would have been easy for him to hear me upstairs. Given the size of our house, I ended up calling my mom and telling her that he had come by and opened the garage, presumably to see if she was home. She mentioned that he had recently been bugging her about some bottles of wine that he wanted back from our house. Anyway, she said that she would change the garage code when she got home, but that never actually happened. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years. During the summer, I was staying with my dad. One day, I received a call from my mom asking if I had been to the house at some point during the day. She was somewhat grilling me because some obvious things, like chairs in the kitchen, had been moved out of place. My mom is a very particular person and likes to keep everything neat and organized. I kind of laughed and said no because I hadn't been to the house in a few days. I wasn't expecting her follow-up question. She asked me, "Did you put the dog in the bathroom and then pull the chair in front of the door?" This was incredibly odd, and she started to freak out after I still said no. I later found out that her ex never stopped emailing, texting, or calling her since they broke up. There were never actually any wine bottles. He just kept badgering and harassing her for money, given that nobody else had our garage code except for my dad, who was out of town at the time. All signs pointed towards the ex-boyfriend Jim. It's creepy to think that he still had our garage code after so many years of being broken up and not communicating. It makes me wonder how many other times he might have come by besides these two notable occurrences. Change your garage code after you get out of a relationship. You never know who may come by. A few years ago, I was on the outs with a very dependent girlfriend. What started out as just casual dating turned into her practically living at my house, needing to constantly be in contact with me and always trying to spy on my social media accounts. She was extremely depressed and used my sympathy as a weapon to keep pulling me back whenever one of her crazy actions would push me away. It took my stupid younger self a long time to see the pattern. When I finally did and she realized that she was losing me, she ran over my dog, thinking that the grieving process would bring us back together. The worst part is, it kind of did. The pain of having to drive my dog to the vet and put him down was too much for me to handle on my own, and for once, she was there for me instead of the other way around. Until a few weeks later, when she drunkenly admitted what she had done. I have never been so mad about anything. I was brought up to never raise my hand to a woman, but my morals were serious. Why test it at that point? I couldn't get the trip to the vet to put the little guy down out of my head. How could this person that I loved have done something so psychopathic? I threw all of her things out and had to physically remove her from my house. I filed a restraining order, but before it went through, I had to threaten to press charges to keep her away. I haven't talked to her since. I feel bad for anyone that gets caught up in her psycho behavior. I thought she loved me, but that really led me to wonder if she was some kind of psycho or sociopath who had been playing me for a fool the whole time. Hi guys, Lazy Hair here, and thank you very much for listening. Special thanks to Eden and Lady White Rabbit for narrating the female perspective stories in this video. I thought that would make things a bit more engrossing, and given the subject matter, I thought it worked really well. So make sure to check out both of their channels by following the links down below or by clicking on Air icons on the screen right now. Stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark. At the end of last summer, I was just about sick to my back teeth of dating apps, but somehow I just couldn't quite bring myself to delete them. Maybe it was an inspired determination to never give up, or maybe it was just the fear of spending my 30s alone, but either way, I ended up just moving them to the second page of my iPhone menu that I could still get notifications and whatnot, but they'd be out of sight, out of mind. Then exactly 10 days after I'd almost sworn them off, I met Howla. She was a good 6 years older than me, and she lived in the next city over, but that didn't bother me, not in the least bit. You see, she was beautiful, a small Arab woman with bouncy natural curls and rich amber eyes that were framed with the most adorable little freckles. Although she didn't make a big deal about it, you could tell she worked out, and to top it off, she was a hematology consultant, the top blood doctor for miles around. A literal boss lady. Needless to say, I was smitten. Our first date was at a Middle Eastern restaurant called Bab, and it went very well indeed. We clicked as well as we had in texts, and we ended up falling into bed together that very same night. She cried when it was over, telling me she'd never done that on a first date before. That I just held her, told her I've got you, and promised that she wouldn't live to regret it. That we had breakfast the next morning, and it was just as magical as the previous evening. A second date a little over 12 hours after the first, which was pretty unprecedented for me. That evening, we had dinner again, with her introducing me to traditional Libyan food, something that was very dear to her as her country of origin's cuisine. That I think I might be a little biased in saying it was incredible, but trust me, it was good. That night, neither of us wanted me to catch the train back to my home city, so I stayed another night, and so began an intense but brief relationship. We talked every single day for months, swapping photos we'd taken of sunsets and parkland vistas, captioning them with, "You should be here. That I miss you," and the like. Being a top-tier doctor, she was far too busy saving lives to ever see me during the week, but we spent almost every weekend together, visiting fancy restaurants in between watching French movies. She was fluent in the language and gave little tours of the grand city that she called home. Everything was going incredibly, at least until one weekend when we couldn't see each other because she was going back to Yorkshire to see her parents. She seemed a wee bit quiet during her visit, but I took that on the chin. Even though she was 38, I knew her parents were very strict, and her mom adhered to a particular kind of Islam known as Salafi or Wahhabi. Those are the kind that don't believe in things like singing or dancing and even take issue with stringed instruments for some reason. Naturally, the idea of her unmarried daughter having a boyfriend was out of the question, let alone a non-Muslim one. So, like I said, I understood why she didn't want to get caught. That I understood why she had set her WhatsApp setting to not display messages on the lock screen, and I understood why she never saved me as a contact. God knows what they would do if they found out about me, and it really didn't bear thinking about it. But even when she got back to the flat she lived in, even when she was rid of her parents for another few weeks, she seemed a little cold. However, a week or so went by, and she seemed to return to being her normally warm and affectionate self. So for the next few months, I didn't think anything of it. All the strange negativity she'd brought back from her parents' place was forgotten, right up until the time around her birthday when she'd once again promised them that she'd make the trip home to see them. Needless to say, I was prepared for some turbulence, but I had absolutely no idea how bad things were about to get. That it ended on the Monday after she got home. We had a massive fight about the future, how we were basically doomed, and how her parents would never accept a non-Muslim or anyone who earned under 6 figures a year. That I talked about the prospect of me converting religiously, or maybe writing her father a formal letter in Arabic asking for his permission to marry her. I knew he'd respect that, but the idea just terrified her. "You're too optimistic," she'd say. "Too young, too naive." We continued to argue, but she just settled into the excuse of, "I just don't have time for a relationship right now." That I'm sorry, what we had was nice, yes, but that's all in the past. Hate me, just hate me. It'll be easier to let me go that way. I knew something had happened back at her parents' place, something that tipped her over the edge of pessimism and into full-on doomsaying. That I begged her to tell me what it was, but she wouldn't. She denied anything bad even happened at all, but I could always tell when she was lying, and she was never any good at it. After that, after I failed to convince her to stay, it was all just tears and apologies until I finally got the balls to just say, "Masalama ya habibi, Allah fiz. Goodbye, my darling, God protect you." That I tried to keep in touch after the breakup. She was someone who had achieved so much in her life but was, by her own admission, a little messed up. I didn't want to just abandon her because she'd broken my heart. She said it herself that she'd like to keep in touch but was worried it would blur the lines. How it was better if we didn't have any emotional attachments, since it was so heartbreaking that two people who got on so well just didn't have any kind of future together. That I assured her as best as I could that it wouldn't be that way. That I just kept trying to weasel back into her life. That I genuinely just wanted to stay in touch. That I, in her own words, she would always reply to messages, but she didn't. The very next day, her replies dropped off and eventually petered out altogether. That it was crushing. Something must have happened to her, I thought, but I tried to push the idea out of my head. That it was a pathetic attempt to reassure myself that she still wanted to talk. She just couldn't. There had been a car accident. She lost her phone. She was sick. Maybe all these worried thoughts came flooding into my head, all an attempt to replace the devastating reality that she just didn't give a monkey's toss about me anymore, that she was cold-hearted enough to just cut me out of her life. As I said, I tried my best to force such ideas out of my head, but the more I tried, the more they got a grip on me. One day, I just decided to call her, just to see how she was doing. My heart pounded in my chest as the phone rang, mainly from anticipating the pain that would hit me when I heard her say something along the lines of, "Oh God, leave me alone, that I'm blocking this number." But her mobile just went to voicemail over and over again, and I tried calling a lot that day at different times just to make sure. She wasn't responding on any of her social media accounts either, not a single one. None of the messages were even being read, and she always read her WhatsApp messages. Always, even if she wasn't going to reply, She'd read them the next day that I tried her at work, the same adrenaline pumping through me as I expected to hear the worst, but when the call was picked up and I heard a voice on the other end, I immediately recognized that it wasn't her. "You through the Dr. Peterson," they said that it was a male voice. I asked the guy if I could speak to Dr. Howlett, that I used her second name, but I'm not prepared to give that one out here. To my shock, he told me that she hadn't been into work for the past 2 weeks and that as far as he knew, she didn't work in that hospital anymore. That I asked if she was okay, and he had no idea that he'd been transferred there a few weeks prior to fill a temporary consultancy position. She loved that job. She said it was her future. She once told me that getting that consultant's position was the greatest achievement of her life. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. As crazy as it sounds, I decided to try and visit her at her apartment in the next city over, even if she was home, had moved jobs and just told me to get lost. At least it would ease my mind. At least I'd know she was okay. That I rang her apartment intermittently for hours, hoping she'd either answer or that I could catch her returning home. Eventually, I saw one of her neighbors walking into the apartment building, and I mustered the courage to ask him about Howla. He didn't know her by name, but he did have some information, telling me he'd seen some people moving some furniture out of the apartment about a week prior. That I asked him if it was a moving company or something, and he said no, just 3 Arab-looking people, 2 older, 1 younger. That I pestered him for a description of them, and from what I could tell, it sounded like her mom, dad, and brother. That I pressed someone on whether or not they'd actually seen Howla, and he told me no one fitting her description was there that day, and he'd been in and out of that flat an awful lot. My last move was to track down a phone number for her dad. Getting hold of the family landline would at least give me an idea if she was okay or not. The best case scenario was that she just moved back in with her parents for whatever reason, be it a breakdown or maybe to look after one of them if they were sick or something. That I mean, the whole situation just seemed really unusual, and I had a terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was very, very wrong. Since he was a retired doctor, it was relatively easy to find his number. That I just lied to an old colleague of his, telling them I was an old patient who wanted to say thank you. But when I called, what I was told had me absolutely terrified. That I know it was the right person. That I know from the cute little impressions Howla used to do of him. That I know I was talking to her dad. But the man I spoke to said he had no daughter named Howla, but not in the confused, bewildered manner you'd expect from a genuine case of mistaken identity. He got angry, really angry, and before he hung up the phone, never to answer me again, he told me he knew who I was, that I had made a serious mistake, and that if I ever called again, he'd be contacting the police. But it's me that's going to be contacting the police because I think something terrible has happened to her, and I think her parents are responsible, with some help from her brother. She'd only mentioned once or twice how controlling they were, how they'd kill her if they ever found out that we were together. I always thought she meant metaphorically, never literally, but for the past few months, I'm starting to think otherwise. That I think my ex's parents found out about us, and I think they may have murdered her. That I have no way to prove it, and the police won't listen to me. That I tried to report her missing, but the policewoman I spoke to said they got a call from a woman in Switzerland who assured them that she was Howla and that she wasn't missing at all. Only I know for a fact that she has a sister in Geneva who works for the WHO, one who might well be easily convinced to lie to protect her parents. That it's way beyond her just ignoring me at this point. Surely she'd have contacted me and told me to stop looking for her, to just give up, but she hasn't, and she was always such a lioness, never afraid to tell me what she was thinking. That I just hope I can get to the bottom of this one day. But it terrifies me to think that a girl could just be disappeared by her own parents, and if that really is the case, then I won't rest until they face justice. I won't stop until I find Howla. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, Be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/letsreadofficial and give and receive feedback from the community and maybe even hear your story featured in the next video. Join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts, links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, isn't that what it means to be a scientist? To push the boundaries of the unknown, to bravely, actively explore the enormity of our thoughts. When I was in my junior year of high school, I had my first relationship. His name was Michael, and he was a senior at a different high school in the next town over. We met through Facebook, he messaged me, and we started talking from there. We began hanging out and attending each other's games. I'd go to his football games, and he'd come to my softball games. We officially became boyfriend and girlfriend after a few weeks. Since we were in high school, though, we didn't go on a lot of traditional dates like dinner or drinks. We were just kids still. Our dates usually consisted of getting burritos, going for drives, or hanging out at his place since my parents were always home, which made things awkward in case we wanted to do anything. The best way I could describe Michael is that he was a bit of a hothead. He was big for a 17-year-old, which is why he played football, but he didn't hang out with the jocks. Instead, he spent more time with the stoner crowd and the regular crowd, at least that's what he told me. I didn't go to the same school as him, so I didn't see who he was with during lunch. I also didn't really meet a lot of his friends. We mostly hung out just the two of us instead of in group settings. Since he lived kind of far away and I couldn't drive yet, it did get annoying. Truthfully, I started to develop feelings for a boy named Rob at my own school, who was in my grade. Around the same time, I felt myself losing interest in Michael. I wanted to test things out with Rob, so one night when Michael was asking to hang out, I asked him to pick me up so we could talk. He knew right away that something was off when I said that. When he picked me up, we went for a drive, and I told him that I thought we should take a break. He refused to accept that I was serious and angrily demanded to know what he did wrong. When I told him it was just that I felt the spark wasn't there anymore, he got so mad that he punched his dashboard, leaving a big indent in it. He started yelling and scaring me. So I was about to get out of the car, but he stopped me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "No, no, no," asking me not to leave. He told me he was just angry but that he would drive me home. He put the car back in drive and started driving us. As we drove, he kept getting angrier, asking for more details about what he did wrong. He started blowing stop signs, and that's when I realized we weren't going in the direction of my parents' house. I asked him to pull over and let me out, but he yelled, "No." We were approaching some wooded area, and that's when I started getting really scared. I had never seen him like this before. He was showing me a crazy side of himself. I managed to get out of the car when he stopped it on the side of some quiet road. He yelled for me to come back, but I didn't. My mom came to pick me up, and Michael sent me an apology text later that night, which I didn't respond to. 2 nights later, I left my house to walk to Rob's, who lived only 2 blocks away from me. On my way there, I spotted someone across the street, not too far behind me, walking at about the same pace. They were wearing a hoodie with the hood up, so I couldn't see their face. Foot traffic on our block wasn't too common, but it also wasn't super weird either. The closer I got to Rob's house, the closer the person across the street got. As I continued up the street, I turned again and saw that the person was now on the same side of the street as me. My heart started to race, and I began walking faster. According to my phone, Rob's house was coming up just on the right. I texted him to come outside, please, because I thought I was being followed. He replied back, okay. I turned one more time as I heard the sound of shoes running on the sidewalk approaching from behind me, and I saw the guy in the black hoodie running at me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could for about 5 seconds before seeing Rob run to the front of his house in confusion. I turned around again and saw the guy in black running in the opposite direction down the street. I keep saying, the guy in black, but I knew it was Michael. That guy had an identical height to him from what I could tell. A few instances happened after that, like getting calls with no caller ID and seeing Michael's car parked outside my parents' house in the middle of the night. My parents were aware of what was going on, and one day my dad drove us over to Michael's house and knocked on the front door while I was in the car. He had a long, loud talk with Michael's parents. I lowered the windows to listen, and most notably, what my dad yelled was that he didn't care how old Michael was, it was still harassment. He warned that if Michael kept trying to contact me in any way, we would get the police involved. It worked. Michael stopped trying to contact me after that. For those wondering, Rob and I ended up dating for around a year. My relationship with Michael was an early lesson in my life to watch out for red flags.